What happens when a royal interview goes completely off the rails and a beloved late-night host has to make the toughest decision of his career? Tonight we're diving into the explosive confrontation that left audiences stunned and producers scrambling. This is the story of how one of television's most respected interviewers faced his biggest challenge yet, and why sometimes doing the right thing means making the hardest choice. But before we get into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think about celebrities who can't handle tough questions. The Ed Sullivan Theater buzzed with its usual pre-show energy as Stephen Colbert reviewed his notes one final time. His team had spent weeks preparing for this interview, knowing it would draw massive attention. The guest arriving tonight was someone who had dominated headlines for years, someone whose every public appearance sparked debate and discussion across social media platforms worldwide. "Stephen, she's here," his producer announced through the earpiece, watching as the black SUV pulled up outside the theater. Security had been doubled for tonight's taping, with extra personnel stationed both inside and outside the building. The anticipation was palpable. You could feel it in the air as crew members took their positions and audience members settled into their seats. Colbert straightened his tie and walked toward his desk, acknowledging the warm-up comedian who was finishing his routine. The audience was particularly energetic tonight, clearly excited about the upcoming interview. Many had traveled from out of state specifically for this taping, hoping to witness what they expected would be television gold. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Meghan Markle," Colbert announced with his characteristic warmth, gesturing toward the entrance as the familiar theme music played. The audience erupted in applause as she walked onto the stage, waving and smiling broadly. She wore an elegant navy blue dress that caught the studio lights perfectly, her hair styled in loose waves that framed her face. "Thank you so much for having me, Stephen," she said as she settled into the guest chair, crossing her legs and adjusting her posture. "I've been looking forward to this conversation for weeks. Your show has always been such an important platform for meaningful dialogue." "Well, we're thrilled to have you here," Colbert replied, shuffling his index cards with practiced ease. "And I have to say, you look fantastic. How are you feeling tonight?" "I'm feeling wonderful, thank you for asking," she responded, her smile brightening even more. "There's something so special about being here in this historic theater, knowing all the incredible conversations that have happened on this very stage. I feel honored to be part of that legacy." The interview began smoothly, with Colbert asking about her recent charitable endeavors and upcoming projects. She spoke passionately about various causes close to her heart, discussing her work with women's empowerment organizations and her efforts to promote literacy among underprivileged children. The audience hung on her every word, occasionally breaking into spontaneous applause. "You've been incredibly busy with your foundation work," Colbert noted, leaning forward slightly. "Can you tell us about the new initiative you're launching?" "Next month?" "Absolutely," she replied enthusiastically, her hands gesturing expressively as she spoke. "We're partnering with several organizations to create mentorship programs for young women in underserved communities. It's something I'm incredibly passionate about because I believe every young person deserves someone who believes in their potential." For the first 15 minutes, everything proceeded exactly as planned. The conversation flowed naturally, with Colbert's gentle humor complementing her thoughtful responses. His questions were respectful but engaging, touching on her transition from acting to activism and her experiences with public service. "Now I want to talk about something that I think many people are curious about," Colbert said, his tone remaining conversational but becoming slightly more serious. "You've been very open about the challenges of living in the public eye, especially regarding media coverage. How do you handle criticism, particularly when it feels unfair or inaccurate?" Her smile faltered for just a moment, so briefly that most viewers wouldn't have noticed. But Colbert, with his years of experience reading guests, caught the subtle shift in her demeanor. She recovered quickly, maintaining her composure as she formulated her response. "That's a great question, Stephen. she said, her voice still pleasant but carrying a slight edge that hadn't been there moments before. I think anyone in the public eye has to develop thick skin, and I've certainly had to learn that lesson. But I also think it's important to distinguish between fair criticism and attacks that cross the line. Absolutely, Colbert agreed, nodding thoughtfully. And speaking of media coverage, there have been some recent reports about tensions within your own team. Some former staff members have made some pretty serious allegations about working conditions. How do you respond to those claims? The question hung in the air for a moment, and the studio audience seemed to collectively hold its breath. This was the kind of question that separated seasoned interviewers from amateurs, the ability to ask tough questions while maintaining respect and professionalism. Colbert had built his reputation on exactly this kind of balanced approach. Her posture stiffened noticeably, and her hands, which had been gesturing freely throughout the conversation, now gripped the arms of her chair. I think it's unfortunate when disgruntled former employees try to rewrite history, she said, her voice growing cooler. These are people who were let go for performance issues, and now they're trying to create false narratives. I understand. That must be frustrating, Colbert replied gently, maintaining his professional demeanor. But some of these allegations are quite specific, and they're coming from multiple sources. Don't you think your audience deserves to hear your side of the story? My side of the story? She repeated, her voice rising slightly. Stephen, I came here tonight expecting a respectful conversation, not an ambush interview. These are baseless accusations from people with questionable motives. The temperature in the room seemed to shift as tension crept into what had been a pleasant exchange. Colbert remained calm, his years of experience guiding him through what was clearly becoming a difficult moment. He had interviewed thousands of guests over his career, and he knew how to navigate choppy waters while maintaining his integrity as a journalist. I don't think asking about publicly reported allegations constitutes an ambush, he said carefully, his tone remaining steady and professional. These stories have been covered extensively, and I think it's fair to give you an opportunity to address them directly. Fair? She said, her voice now clearly strained. What's fair about giving credence to lies and distortions? You're supposed to be one of the good guys, Stephen. I thought I could trust you to treat me with respect. The audience was now completely silent, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't the usual back and forth of a late-night interview. This was something much more intense and unpredictable. Colbert took a deep breath, recognizing that this interview was heading into uncharted territory. His producer's voice crackled through his earpiece, reminding him to stay calm and professional. He had handled difficult guests before, but something about this situation felt different, more volatile than his usual challenging interviews. I absolutely want to treat you with respect, he said, his voice sincere but firm. And part of that respect means having an honest conversation about issues that are in the public domain. I'm not here to attack you, but I am here to ask the questions that I think viewers want answered. Questions that viewers want answered? She shot back, her composure beginning to crack more visibly. Or questions that generate headlines and controversy? Because there's a big difference, Stephen, and I think you know that. The studio audience was now completely transfixed, many of them pulling out their phones despite the no-recording policy. The energy in the room had shifted from excited anticipation to uncomfortable tension. Even the camera operators seemed to sense that they were capturing something extraordinary. I think that's unfair, Colbert replied, maintaining his professional tone despite the growing hostility from his guest. I've been doing this job for a long time, and I've always tried to balance entertainment with substantive journalism. When public figures make news, especially controversial news, it's my job to explore those stories. Your job, she said, her voice now carrying a sharp edge that cut through the studio's silence. Your job is supposed to be entertainment, not character assassination. I came here to talk about my charitable work, my positive contributions to society, not to be grilled like I'm on trial. And we did talk about your charitable work, Colbert pointed out, gesturing to his notes. For the first part of our conversation, we discussed your foundation, your mentorship programs, your advocacy work. But surely you understand that a complete interview has to address the full picture of what's happening in your life. The full picture according to who? She demanded, her voice rising another notch. According to tabloid journalists who make up stories for clicks? According to people who have axes to grind? That's not journalism, Stephen. That's gossip masquerading as news. Colbert could feel the interview slipping away from him, but his professional instincts kicked in. He had spent decades learning how to handle difficult situations, and he knew that backing down now would set a dangerous precedent. More importantly, he genuinely believed that his questions were fair and necessary. "I understand you're upset," he said, his tone becoming even more measured and calm. "But these aren't tabloid stories I'm referencing. These are reports from established news organizations, investigations by credible journalists. When multiple former employees make similar allegations, that becomes news whether we like it or not." "Credible journalists?" She laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Stephen, you of all people should understand how the media works. You built your entire career satirizing the very system you're now defending. These so-called credible journalists are part of a machine that chews people up and spits them out for profit." "That's exactly why I think it's important to give you this platform," he responded, leaning forward slightly. "This is your chance to tell your side, to set the record straight if these reports are indeed false. Isn't that better than letting these stories go unchallenged?" "My side?" she repeated, her voice dripping with incredulity. "You want my side? Fine. My side is that I've been targeted by a coordinated campaign of harassment and lies ever since I dared to speak my truth about certain institutions. My side is that people who couldn't handle working for a strong, independent woman have decided to retaliate by spreading vicious rumors." The audience was now visibly uncomfortable, many shifting in their seats or exchanging worried glances. This was far beyond the usual late-night television drama. This felt personal and raw in a way that made everyone present feel like unwilling witnesses to something that should have remained private. "I hear what you're saying," Colbert said carefully. "But don't you think it's possible that there might be some validity to concerns about workplace culture? Even if the overall narrative is unfair, couldn't there be individual incidents that deserve examination?" "Individual incidents," she said, her voice now reaching a pitch that made several audience members wince. "You mean like the incident where I asked someone to do their job properly? Or the incident where I expected professional standards to be maintained? Because apparently when a woman has expectations, that's called being difficult." "I'm not making judgments about your management style," Colbert replied, his patience beginning to show signs of strain despite his professional training. "I'm simply asking you to respond to specific allegations that have been made public. That's what journalism is, giving people a chance to respond to claims about their conduct." "Journalism?" she scoffed, standing up suddenly from her chair, causing the studio lights to cast dramatic shadows across her face. "This isn't journalism, Stephen. This is a hit job, and I refuse to sit here and participate in my own character assassination." The sudden movement caught everyone off guard. Camera operators adjusted their shots instinctively, while audience members gasped audibly. Colbert remained seated, his hands folded calmly on his desk, but his expression showed genuine concern about where this situation was heading. "Please, sit down," he said gently, extending his hand in a calming gesture. "Let's finish this conversation like adults. I'm not trying to attack you. I'm trying to have an honest discussion about issues that are already in the public sphere." "Honest discussion?" she said, pacing slightly in the small space beside her chair. "There's nothing honest about this, Stephen. You invited me here under false pretenses, pretending this would be a friendly conversation about my work, and then you ambushed me with gotcha questions designed to make me look bad." "That's simply not true," Colbert said, his voice remaining steady but with a hint of frustration creeping in. My team reached out to your representatives. We provided a list of potential topics, and workplace allegations were specifically mentioned as something we might discuss. This isn't an ambush. This is journalism. Your team mentioned it might come up, she said, turning to face him directly, her eyes blazing with anger. They didn't say it would dominate the entire second half of the interview. They didn't say you'd keep pushing and pushing even after I made it clear I didn't want to discuss baseless allegations. The tension in the studio was now so thick, it felt suffocating. Colbert's producer was frantically gesturing from the control booth, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let this unprecedented situation play out. The audience sat in stunned silence, many of them recording on their phones despite knowing they shouldn't. I've asked maybe 3 questions about this topic, Colbert said, his professional mask beginning to slip slightly. 3 questions out of a 30-minute interview. I think that's reasonable given the amount of coverage these allegations have received. Reasonable, she said, her voice now shaking with emotion. What's reasonable about trying to destroy someone's reputation on national television? What's reasonable about giving a platform to lies and distortions while pretending to be neutral? I'm not trying to destroy anyone's reputation, Colbert replied, his own voice beginning to show signs of strain. I'm trying to do my job, which is to ask the questions that need to be asked. If you have good answers to these questions, then giving you this platform should help your reputation, not hurt it. Good answers? She said, whirling around to face him with such intensity that several audience members actually leaned back in their seats. Stephen, there are no good answers to loaded questions based on lies. You're asking me to defend myself against fabricated accusations, and then when I refuse to play that game, you act like I'm being unreasonable. Colbert could see his producer making frantic hand signals from the control booth, clearly indicating they should cut to commercial. But something in his journalistic instincts told him to see this through. He had spent his entire career building a reputation for fairness and integrity, and he wasn't about to abandon those principles now, even in the face of this unprecedented outburst. I respect that you feel these questions are unfair, he said, his voice taking on the tone of someone who had reached the limits of his patience while still trying to maintain professionalism. But the fact remains that multiple credible news organizations have reported on these issues. As a journalist, I have a responsibility to address them, and as a public figure, you have a responsibility to respond. Responsibility? She practically shouted, causing several audience members to actually jump in their seats. My only responsibility is to myself and my family, not to satisfy the bloodthirsty appetite of a media machine that profits from tearing people down. I don't owe you or anyone else explanations for gossip and lies. The studio fell into an eerie silence broken only by the hum of cameras and lighting equipment. Even the usually invisible crew members had stopped their quiet movements, transfixed by what was unfolding before them. This was no longer television entertainment. This was something raw and real that no one quite knew how to handle. "Ma'am," Colbert said, his voice now carrying the authority of someone who had finally reached his breaking point, "I need you to either sit down and finish this interview professionally, or we're going to have to end this segment right now." "End the segment," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, that's rich, Stephen. You create this hostile environment. You ambush me with attack questions, and now you're threatening to end the interview because I won't quietly submit to your character assassination?" "I'm not threatening anything," he replied, standing up from behind his desk for the first time since the interview began. His movement was deliberate and calm, but it carried unmistakable authority. "I'm simply stating that this interview requires a basic level of mutual respect and professionalism. If you can't provide that, then we can't continue." "Mutual respect?" she said, her voice reaching a volume that made the microphones crackle slightly. "Where was the mutual respect when you decided to ambush me? Where was the professionalism when you chose to focus on tabloid nonsense instead of the important work I'm doing. The important work you're doing is exactly what we spent the first half of this interview discussing, Colbert said, his voice now carrying an edge of steel that his regular viewers had rarely heard. But part of being a public figure means answering difficult questions, not just the easy ones that make you look good. Difficult questions? She screamed, her composure completely shattered now. These aren't difficult questions, Stephen. They're gotcha questions designed to generate controversy and ratings. You're no better than the tabloid journalists you pretend to be above. The insult hung in the air like a physical presence. Colbert's jaw tightened slightly, and for a moment, the practiced television host disappeared, replaced by a man whose professional integrity had just been directly attacked. The audience sensed the shift immediately, a collective intake of breath rippling through the theater. "Ma'am," he said, his voice now carrying the full weight of his decades in television, "I'm going to ask you one more time to sit down and conduct yourself appropriately, or I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "Ask me to leave?" she said, her voice filled with incredulous rage. "You're going to kick me off your show because I won't play along with your hit piece? This is exactly the kind of behavior that proves everything I've been saying about media bias and unfair treatment." "This has nothing to do with media bias," Colbert replied, his voice now completely steady and authoritative. "This has to do with basic professional courtesy and respect for this show, this audience, and this process. You're screaming at me on live television because I asked you to respond to public allegations. That's not journalism bias. That's you losing control." "Losing control?" she said, her voice now so loud that it was clearly audible even without the microphones. "I'm not losing control. I'm refusing to be controlled. I'm refusing to sit quietly while you try to destroy my reputation for ratings." At that moment, Colbert made the decision that would define this entire incident. He walked around his desk, moving with the calm confidence of someone who had finally reached his limit. The cameras followed him automatically, capturing every moment of what was clearly television history in the making. "Security," he said, speaking directly to his earpiece while maintaining eye contact with his guest. "Please escort our guest from the building." The words seemed to echo in the stunned silence of the theater. For a moment, nobody moved, as if the entire room was processing what had just happened. Then, two security guards appeared from the wings, moving professionally but cautiously toward the increasingly agitated guest. "You're actually doing this?" she said, her voice a mixture of disbelief and fury. "You're actually having me removed because I wouldn't submit to your attack interview? I'm having you removed because you're screaming at me and disrupting this show," Colbert replied, his voice now carrying the finality of someone who had made an irreversible decision. This audience paid to see a professional television show, not a public meltdown. "Professional?" she said as the security guards approached her cautiously. "There's nothing professional about ambush journalism disguised as entertainment. You should be ashamed of yourself, Stephen. You used to stand for something better than this." The security guards reached her position, and one of them spoke quietly into her ear, presumably explaining that she needed to leave voluntarily or they would have to escort her out. The audience watched in complete fascination and horror as this unprecedented scene played out before them. "Ma'am, you need to come with us," one of the security guards said, his voice professional but firm. "We can do this quietly and respectfully, but you need to leave now." "Quietly and respectfully?" she said, her voice still carrying across the entire theater. "There's nothing quiet or respectful about this entire setup. This is a disgrace, and everyone here knows it." As the security guards began to guide her toward the exit, she turned back toward Colbert one final time. "You've shown your true colors tonight, Stephen. You're just another media hack pretending to be above the fray while participating in the same destructive games as everyone else." Colbert stood silently behind his desk, watching as the security guards escorted her toward the wings. His expression was unreadable, a mixture of professional composure and genuine sadness about how the situation had deteriorated. The audience remained completely silent, many of them clearly shocked by what they had just witnessed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Colbert said, as the guest disappeared from view, his voice now returning to its familiar television cadence, "we're going to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we'll have some music from our friends in the band." As the cameras cut away and the applause sign lit up, the audience responded with uncertain clapping, clearly unsure of how to react to what had just transpired. Many of them continued to stare at the empty guest chair, as if expecting the entire incident to have been some elaborate television stunt. But it wasn't a stunt. It was the night that one of television's most respected hosts had to make the difficult decision to remove a guest from his show, proving that sometimes maintaining professional standards means making the tough choices, even when they generate controversy and headlines. So what do you think? Was Stephen Colbert right to remove his guest from the show, or should he have handled the situation differently? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one.